a cloth. So you're wrapping meat and cheese together in one cloth. As long as they do not touch one another. So in other words, I could wrap them together in one wrapping, but they cannot directly touch each other. Similarly again, two guests at an inn could eat at one table. This one could eat meat, this one could eat milk, and what? And ve'in choshishin, and we need not be worried. Rabbi said, need not be worried for what? So what are we talking about over here? We're talking about, again, lemaisa. If two guests are sitting at a table at an inn, so we'll say they could eat, one could eat milchiks, one could eat fleishiks at the same table, and we're not concerned that what? They're going to share their food with one another. Because they don't know each other, therefore, again, there's no concern that they're going to take of each other's food or share of each other's food. Says the Gemara. So remember, again, the first statement of the Mishnah says you could wrap milk and meat together in the same cloth, but they cannot touch each other. To which the Gemara says, who cares if they touch each other? What does that mean? What does that matter, Rabbi? Say, sonin bitsonin, sonin bitsonin. Rabbi, remember again, it's cold meat touching cold milk, which does absolutely nothing. So what's the big deal that they're wrapped together? Sabai will say it's true, even though ultimately, again, the klipa will say you don't have to remove an outer layer of the milk or the meat if they touch each other cold. But hadachami labai, Rabbi say if milk and meat touch each other, you still have to wash them, each of them down prior to using it. Sabai says even though again there is no blia, there's no absorption, at the end of the day there's still a hadacha, there's still a wiping down that is necessary, and as such, when possible, we avoid ultimately having them have contact with one another. Rabbi Shmuel so remember, Rabbi Shmuel said that if you have two visitors at an inn, and they're either one is eating milchiks, one is eating fleishiks, they can eat at the same table, and we are not concerned that they will come to share of their food with one another. Amr Shmuel, Lo Shon Elashem Akirin Zazah. This is only true if they don't know each other. But if they do know each other, then Rabbi said they cannot sit at the same table, one eating meat and one eating milk, out of a concern that they will come to share their food with each other. That supports this. If you have two visitors, two guests who are frequenting the same inn, one comes from the north, one comes from the south. Zeba bechatichaso, v'zeba bigvinaso. One comes with his meat, one comes with his cheese. Ochlin al shulchan echad. They have the ability to go ahead and eat at the same table. Zebasar v'zegvina. This one could eat his meat, this one could eat his cheese. Ve'in choshishin. And we need not be concerned that they will come to go ahead and share their food with each other. V'lo asru ela betfisa achos. And ultimately, again, the only time we ask her to say is when it's in one bundle. Tfisa achas. What does that mean, one bundle? To which the Gemara says, Eloka ain't tfisa achas. Rather, what it means is like one bundle, i.e., they're going ahead and eating it together. So we'll say, by the way, let's read on. And that's an interesting halacha that comes from this. What if you have two brothers? So we'll say, if it's brothers, then what? Then we have a concern that maybe they will come to share their food with each other. So what we've established so far is as follows. Two people could eat meat and milk at the same table if what? Right? If they don't know each other or there's no concern they're going to share with one another, then they can mamish eat meat and milk at the same exact table. If they know each other, the concern is they will come to share their food with one another. Now, let's say a corollary case. Two brothers. Now, if they're brothers, they have to be concerned that what? They're going to share with one another. Rabbi says an interesting case of brothers, which is what? Which is umakpidin zalzeh. They don't share. Okay. No, they weren't brought up with the value of sharing, right? So they are related. I'm sure they love each other very much, but they do not share with one another. Makpidin zalzeh means they do not share their stuff with one another. So we'll say, so can they eat meat and milk at the same table? Mahu. Amarle, so they said to him, Yomru kalasrike nasurun srike baitos mutarin. So it's actually interesting. So the Gemara says ultimately again, so essentially, do we say, what do we focus on? Do we focus on the fact that they're brothers, and therefore again there's a concern that they will share their milk and meat with each other, or are we focused on the fact that they don't share? And because they don't share, ultimately there's no concern that they will come to eat of each other's milk and meat. To which the Gemara says an interesting statement. Yomru kol asrikin asurun srikei baikus mutar. Supposed to listen to this. There's a halacha Maseches Pesachim that says as follows: that when making matzah for Pesach, we do not make any images or forms on the matzah. Why not? Because there's a concern that because it takes time to go ahead and make images or forms, so what's going to happen? In other words, we'll say, you don't braid your matzah into shapes, right? You don't. Why? Because there's a concern that it's going to become chametz. It's going to take time. So we'll say there was a guy by the name of Baitus. Baitus had a stamp. So what he would do is he would make images on the matzah, but it didn't take any additional time. Why? What would he just do? Stamp it on. So the question is, do we allow the stamp of Baitus for matzah on Pesach? To which the Gemara uses the expression, Yomru kol asrikin asun asrikei baikus mutar. Should we say that all the images are asar and the image of Baitus is mutar? In other words, what the Gemara is saying is you can't do that. You can't do that. So meaning halacha lemaisa, there comes a certain point in time where we require halachic uniformity, and if we don't have uniformity, that's when everything kind of unravels. To which the Gemara says, therefore, again, the same way that on Pesach you can't even use the stamp of Baitus. Because essentially, if we allow you to use a stamp of Baitus, we'll say, what's going to end up happening? Other people are going to end up making images on their matzah without a stamp, and you're going to come into a chametz issue. So to Avir Abosai, brothers are brothers are brothers. The halacha of Rabbi Shmuel only says that if two people don't know each other, then what? Then they can eat meat and milk at the same table. But if you know each other, if you have two brothers and they know each other, they don't share. Their brothers never got along. They would never give each other of one another's food. It doesn't make a difference. If you know each other, you cannot eat meat and milk at the same table for fear that you will come to share milk and meat with one another. The Gemara says, So remember again, there's an interesting halacha. You're not allowed to do laundry on Chalamayid. You're not allowed to launder clothing on Chalamayid. However, if you only have one suit, right, you only have one article of clothing, you can launder it on Chalamayid. So says the Gemara, how can you allow that? Yomru, top of Kufches. Yomru kol asrikin asun asriki baikus mutarin. So I don't understand, why if you only have one garment, well, still we shouldn't allow you to go ahead and launder that on Chalamayid. Why? Because they're both saying, people see you laundering your article of clothing on Chalamayid, how are they going to know to draw a distinction between you who only has one article of clothing and everyone else who has multiple articles of clothing? Oh, that's different. Hasam ha'amar mar baravashi ezuro mochiach halav. Rabbi say it's different over there. Why? Because the belt shows the truth. So Rabbi say the halacha was as follows. People who had multiple, we'll call it like tunics, had one belt. You use the same belt for multiple tunics. I will say, but this guy, if he only has one, therefore, again, if I was laundering my tunic, what would I do? I would take my belt off because I was going to wear it with another tunic. This guy who's laundering his shirt, his tunic, so I will say, he keeps the belt on it when he launders it. Why does he keep the belt on it when he launders it? Because he has nothing else to wear it with. When people see him laundering the tunic with the belt on it, they're going to know this is his only article of clothing, and that's why he's permitted to launder it on Chalamayid. So we'll say, so bottom line, halacha lemaisa, what comes out over here? The Rabbi Shmuel is telling me that I could sit down at the table with someone who I do not know. He could eat his milchiks, I could eat my fleishiks, and what? There's no concern that we're going to eat of each other's food. But halacha lemaisa, you cannot sit at the same table with someone whom you know, even if you don't normally share that person, and one person eats milchiks and one person eats fleishiks. So I will say this yields a very important halacha. This yields the halacha, I will say, of siman. Siman tells me as follows. What happens? I will say this unfolds all the time, which is I'm sitting at home and for dinner at night. Some people want to eat milchiks, some people want to eat fleishiks. So according to what we just learned right now in the Mishnah, we'll say, what's the halacha? You're not allowed to do that. That's why, we'll say what we do is, and this is a very important halacha, you are permitted to do it if you have some type of hecker, if you have some type of recognizable distinction. So if we're going to use different placemats, right? So the people are eating the fleishik team, they're going to use the fleishik placemats, right? The milk, just lift it, right? The milchiks team, they're going to use the milchiks placemats. So both say that's okay, right? So halacha l'maaseh. Again, this is allowed, and I will say this is a very important halacha. If you're eating milchiks and fleishiks, not everybody could eat at the same table in the same way. That is asr midrabanan, but asr nevertheless. There has to be some type of recognizable distinction between the milk eaters and the meat eaters. So whatever that distinction is, different placemats, one is eating on the tablecloth, one is eating off the tablecloth, but there has to be some type of recognizable distinction so that the members of the family or those who know each other do not end up eating of one another's food. Good, says the Mishnah Bosai. Tipas chalav, and that is indeed halacha lamaisa. Tipas chalav, shenafla al hachaticha. So we'll say, we get that back now, we're back to basar b'chalav. So tipas chalav shenafla al hachaticha. A drop of milk falls on a piece of meat. So what's the halacha? Im yesh ba benosein tam ba'osa chaticha aser. If that milk is enough to go ahead and infuse flavor into the piece of meat, then the piece of meat will be aser. Now, I will say, I'll show you something very interesting over here. If you look at Rashi in the Mishnah says that we're on Kuf Ches Amud Aleph now, 5 lines down from the top. So Rashi says, Tipas chalav shenafla al chaticha, besocha kedera, al achos min achatichos, v'lo higis es hakedera, v'no lechlach tam atipa ela la'osa chaticha bilva. So we'll say, in Rashi's model, you have a piece of meat that's part of like the stew, we'll call it. This piece of meat is elevated above the other pieces. And what happens? The drop of milk falls on the piece of meat. But in Rashi's model, it's possible that the piece of meat itself is still sitting in the rest of the stew, but it's just elevated a bit. Tosas comes along. If you look on the top Tosas on the left-hand column, and Tosas says, "Chalav shenafla al chaticha basar miyesh benos in tam ba'osa chaticha neseres kisha chaticha kula chutz lerot of iri." So we'll say it's actually interesting. In Tosas' model, what you have to say, the way this case plays out is you have a piece of meat that is outside of the gravy, right? A piece of meat outside of the gravy. So we'll say what it means is the piece of meat is sitting essentially on top of another piece of meat elevated outside of the gravy. So they could be over here machlokes Rashi Tosas as to is the meat sitting. One thing is clear, which is everyone is agreeing this piece of meat is somewhat elevated above the rest of the stew. The shaila is how elevated. According to Rashi, it's possible that it's still sitting in the gravy. According to Tosas, in order for this case to work, and you'll see where this machlokes comes up, it has to be totally outside of the gravy. So essentially what would happen over here is you have a piece of meat, then you have a second piece of meat sitting on top of that first piece of meat. That second piece of meat is in the stew. But now that second piece of meat sitting on the first piece of meat is totally outside of the gravy. And you have a piece, and you have a drop of milk that falls on it. So we'll say, what's the halacha? If there's enough milk to infuse flavor into the piece of meat, so the piece of meat will be aser. Now, right now, it's only the piece of meat that is aser. However, near eskakadera. So I'll say. So now, again, we're going to discuss the ramifications of this case. If the drop of milk fell in, and you went ahead and you mixed the pot. So we'll say the Mishnah is essentially framing for me 2 different cases. If the drop of milk fell on a piece of meat, and that piece of meat is kind of above the rest of the stew, then we just measure the impact of the milk on the meat. If, however, the milk fell into the stew and you mixed the stew, then what I will say? Then I have to look at the impact of the drop of milk on what? On the stew in its entirety. Says the Gemara, Amar Abayi Tamo v'lo mamashu ba'amud d'oraisa. So Abayi just makes an interesting observation. You see from here, Rabbi say that tam, that taste, flavor, even without substance, is aser mid'oraisa. The Rabbi say what that means is as follows. See, if you notice, by the way, the case of the milk, Rabbi say the milk gets absorbed, which means the mamashos of the milk, right, the tangibility, right, the physicality of the milk is no longer really present. There's a tam issue, there's a taste, a flavor issue. So Abaye says, you see from here, that tam is d'oraisa. Because ultimately, again, if you thought it is only midrabanan, then mi basar b'chalav my time alo gamrinan. So now I'll say ultimately, again, I can learn it out that tam ki'ikr, right, from basar b'chalav. To which the Gemara says, no. I'll tell you why you wouldn't be able to learn it from basar b'chalav. The chidushu. I will say ultimately, again, basar b'chalav is a bit of a chidush, not a bit. Actually, we're going to see basar b'chalav is an incredible chidush. I will say, why is basar b'chalav a chidush? Because nowhere else in the Torah do we have 2 permitted items which form together ultimately, again, to go ahead and create Isser. The truth is we have it in one other place. The one other place where you have two permitted items to form Isser is by Shatnez. Right? Shatnez is like this also. You have wool and linen, which comes together to form Usser. Rabbi say in general, again, if something is Usser, that means it's Usser mitchila. It's Usser mitchila. Basar b'chalav is I have basar, which is mutter, chalav, which is mutter. Both are mutter on their own, but ultimately, again, only when you bring them together do they form Isser. So basar b'chalav is chiddush. So therefore, I'm going to say, if you're going to tell me that tam ki'ikar is not the araisa, and you want me to learn from basar b'chalav, I don't know that I will learn from basar b'chalav because basar b'chalav is a chiddush. I chiddushu afagav deleka no sein tam nami. But if that's the case that basar b'chalav is a chiddush, so I'll say I should say it should be asr even when there is no tam, right? Even if halacha lamaisa the milk doesn't infuse tam into the basar, it should still be asr. To which the Gemara says, Amalei Rava derech bishul asra Torah. I'll say no halacha lamaisa because the Torah phrases the lashon ultimately again because the Torah phrases the isser of basar b'chalav with bishul. Bishul by definition tells you that there's an infusion of tam, there's an infusion of taste. So it says the Gemara, Amarav, cave. So we'll say, so therefore again, so fine. So all what we've established over here is that Rabbi say we have the concept that tam v'lo mamasha. We've already established this before. Rabbi say, where did we already learn that tam kicker? Where did we already learn this idea? We learned already by Zra b'Shela, right? By the carbon of the nazir, we already learned this idea that taste infusion is meaningful. To which the Gemara says, Amarav, kevan shenasan tam b'chaticha. Chaticha atzma nases lever. So remember again, we alluded to this concept before. Chanan, right? Chaticha nases nevela, which Rabbi say, remember again, means as follows. When something absorbs a prohibited taste, it's not just the pshat that the new item becomes prohibited in accordance with the ratio of the absorption, but rather the entire item itself becomes a chaticha of isser. We'll say, where are we seeing this? So we're seeing this again by basar b'chalav. If you, simple case, you have a piece of meat that absorbs milk, and we'll say, let's say again, you don't have 60 times the amount of meat corresponding to the bit of milk. So we'll say, so what happens? What happens to the meat? It's aser. Then we'll say, what part of the meat is aser? So remember again, there are two different possibilities. Only the amount of meat corresponding to the amount of milk that it absorbed becomes aser, or we say no. Chaticha asma nasis nevela means what Rabbi say? The entire piece of meat becomes aser. The entire piece of meat becomes aser. So Amarav, kevan shenasa tam b'chaticha, chaticha atzma nasis nevela. So I'll say Rav says that once the meat absorbs milk, the entire piece of meat ultimately becomes nevela, becomes aser. Va'oseres kala chatichos kulan. And ultimately what? Goes ahead and asers all of the other chatichos shehemina. So we'll say, so now watch this. Rav says, in this case of the stew, Rabosai, this is actually quite dramatic. What happens? The drop of milk falls on the meat. Then we'll say, so what happens? We're assuming now that the meat doesn't have shishim keneged the milk. So what happens to the meat? That piece of meat becomes kula aser. And that piece of meat, Rabosai, becomes the chaticha like an avela. The Rabosai, and I remember again, now that piece of meat is where, Rabosai? That piece of meat is in the rest of the stew. The stew is a min b'mino, right? It's like items. So Rav is saying that now it becomes a mixture of min b'mino. Min b'mino ain't no bottle. Like items are not bottle in a mixture. And therefore, again, the entire stew will become aser. So Amalei Mar Zutra, Berei Rav Mari Ravina, Michdi, Rav Kiman Amar L'Shmaite, who does Rav hold according to? Ki Rabbi Yehuda da Amar min b'mino lo bottle. So we'll say Rav is obviously holding like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that min b'mino lo bottle. So we already learned about this, that like mixtures are not bottle. But I would say the Gemara says lema pliga ad Rava. But this would seem to argue on Rava. Why? What does Rava say? Da Amar Rava kasav Rabbi Yehuda koshu min umino v'davar acher silek esmino kimi she'eno v'she'eno mino rabba lava mavatal. So remember again, Rabbi Yehuda says that what's the case? Rabbi Yehuda holds the following. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that when you have a case of min b'mino v'she'eno mino, I both say when you have a mixture of three items, min b'mino v'she'eno mino, like items and dissimilar items. So for hilchos bittul, you can view the like item as if it is not there, and allow the she'eno mino to go ahead and be mevatel the mino. Okay, what does that mean? Let's give you a simple case. You have a meat stew. So a meat stew is often a case of min b'mino b'she'eno mino. The min b'mino is meat. The she'eno mino is gravy. Right? Even aside from other additives, the gravy, right? The gravy itself is a liquid, right? The gravy itself is a liquid. So that's a min b'mino v'she'eno mino. So Rabbi Huda has an interesting sheet. Even though Rabbi Huda holds that min b'mino lo batal, Rabbi Huda will say when you have a mixture of min b'mino v'she'eno mino, so halachically, we allow you to remove, not physically, but halachically, remove the mino from the mixture and allow the she'eno mino, right, the dissimilar item, to become in the majority of the mixture, mavatal the mino. So in this case, remove the permitted meat and allow ultimately again the gravy to be mavatal, the prohibited piece of meat. Amar lei, he said to him, you're right. If we're talking about a case where the meat fell into a liquidy gravy, that would be true. What's the case over here? It fell into a thick gravy. And Rashi, as Rashi points out, rot of ava is dak shal basar v'shuman dekule min basar. Thick gravy has the status of what? Meat. And therefore, again, so it's actually interesting. If you had a case of meat in liquidy gravy, even according to Rabbi Huda holds min b'mino lo batal, he would say what we would do is we would remove the other pieces of meat and see if there's enough liquidy gravy to be mevatel the piece of prohibited meat. But now that we're dealing with a case of thick gravy has the status of meat. Therefore, this whole mixture is what? A case of min b'mino. And therefore, again, at least according to Rabbi Huda, min b'mino would not be batal. My kas savar. So we'll say, let's analyze this. This is incredible. Ikas savar efshal sochto mutter. So we'll say, now we get into another fascinating situation of what we call efshal sochto. And we'll say efshal sochto means we've established that an item has the ability to absorb. But anything that goes in must also what? Must also come out. Now we'll say that's not always true. For example, kli cheres, right? Earthenware vessels, we assume it absorbs, but it's not polate. But in general, let's assume that if a piece of meat absorbs, a piece of meat could also what? What do you call it? Expel. Thank you, expel. Right? If it could absorb, it could also expel. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, what's the status then? So let's analyze this. If we assume that through cooking, a piece of meat could absorb milk, that also tells you that a piece of meat could expel the meat, a piece of meat could also expel the milk absorption. So what's the status of the meat after it expels the meat absorption? That's called, we'll say, efshar l'sochto. Efshar l'sochto means literally you could wring it out, right? What it means is it could expel it. So watch this. So we'll say if you hold that the same way the meat could absorb, the meat could also expel the milk. That means if you hold efshar l'sochto mutter, chaticha amay nasis nevela. That means we'll say if I know that a piece of meat absorbed milk, all I need to do is what? Find a way to expel the meat from the milk. Expel the milk from the meat, and l'maisek and the chaticha should be mutter again. Ela kasava, rather again, our Mishnah saying these opinions must be holding efshal l'sochto aser. So ultimately, again, rather we must be holding about say that efshal l'sochto is aser. That no. Once you're a piece of meat and you absorb milk, then what? Done. There is no ability to expel that absorption. The itmar, here we go, Rabbi say, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, the Amri efshal l'sochto aser. They hold Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi say, all hold that once the piece of meat absorbs the milk, Rabbi say, there is no schita, right? There is no expelling of that absorption. And therefore, again, it is aser no matter what. Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon, Bar Rabbi, Reish Lakish, Tamri, efshal l'sochto, mutter. They ultimately hold that what? They ultimately hold efshal l'sochto mutter, which Rabbi means what? That if you create a situation where the meat is able to expel the milk that it absorbed, inachinami, the meat itself could once again become permitted. Rabbi, if you think about it, it would be no different than kashering an item. The same way that my pot absorbs, I could go ahead and create a process through which it expels the absorptions. They would hold that when meat absorbs, you can create a process through which the meat expels the absorptions, rendering the piece of meat fit for consumption again. The savara. So this is machlokes. This is a fundamental machlokes. Do we say efshal l'sochto aser, which means essentially once the meat becomes aser, it's aser forever. You cannot remedy it, right? Now the truth is, Rabbi say that's not totally true. You can technically remedy it if it goes in and becomes aser, and then what? Is batal in another mixture. then ultimately it could become batal. That's not called remedying it, that's being mevatal it. Or do you say efshal sochto mutter, which means Rabbi say aloch lamaisa, you could actually purge the meat of the absorptions, and the meat itself will become mutter. So the Gemara says, "V'sava Rav efshal sochto aser." Does Rav really hold that efshal sochto is aser? That if you could somehow purge the absorptions, then ultimately again the pizza meat will still be aser. Ha'itmar kizayis basar shenafal l'soch yaroshchal. Will say, watch, this is a great case. You have a kizayis of meat that fell into a pot of milk. Kizayis of meat that fell into a pot of milk. Amar Rav said, basar aser, the chalav mutter. It's actually quite interesting. So Rav said that halacha l'maisa, the meat is aser, but the chalav is mutter. So both say the basar is aser. Why? Because the milk gave tam into the meat. But yet, interestingly enough, the chalav, the milk itself, is going to be mutter. V'sagdaitcha efshal l'sochto aser. Then I will say, if you hold efshal l'sochto aser, then what? Amad beis chalav amai mutter. The Rabbi say, why should the milk be mutter? After all, what's going to happen over here? Chalav nevelu. And Rabbi say, look at the top Rashi and Amud Beis. Chalav amay mutter. Listen to this. Hari chalav ma'at shenivla b'basar nasa nevela shai ne'asar ukishe chazar v'niflat b'shara chalav havile min b'mino chalav aser b'chalav heter v'rav islay min b'mino butter. I say, watch this. Watch this. If you hold this is incredible. If you hold efshal l'sochta aser, so we'll say, get ready for this. Get ready for this. I have a pot of milk. The piece of meat falls in. And we'll say, now what happens? What happens? So when the piece of meat falls in, we'll say a couple of things occur. Number one, the meat absorbs the milk. So I got it. Number one, what's the status of the meat? It was aser. Now we'll say, presumably, what else happens? What else happens? The same way that the meat absorbs the milk, what else does the meat do? The meat goes ahead and exudes flavor. Part of that flavor is the very milk that it absorbed. The milk that the meat absorbed becomes nevela, right? Becomes aser. The meat is now expelling, ultimately, again, nevela milk back into the mixture of milk. Which means now in that milk, what do you have? You have regular chalav, and Abba say, what else do you have? Basar b'chalav chalav. And what is that, Rabbi say? That is a case of min b'mino. And a case of min b'mino, according to Rav, is going to be aser. In which case, why does Rav hold that what? Why does Rav hold that the meat is aser, but the milk is mutter? To which the Gemara says, the olam kasava Rav efshal sochto aser. In reality, Rav holds efshal sochto ultimately again is going to be aser. So what's happening over here? The shiny hasa. I'll say this is a wild answer. The shiny hasa on the Amrkra lo sevashel gedi bechalivimo. Lo sevashel gedi bechalivimo. Gedi asra Torah. Wow. I will say, so this is a wild answer, which is the Gemara says, you're right. There's a special gzeras hakasa basar b'chalav. I will say basar b'chalav, it is only the meat which becomes aser, the milk never becomes aser. Lo sevashel gedi bechalivimo, the prohibition is phrased as do not cook the meat in the milk. So according to Rav, will say the Gemara is suggesting that halacha l'maisa, the way Rav sees this prohibition, Rav will say is what? Is on the meat and not on the milk. It's on the meat and not on the milk. And therefore halacha l'maisa, that's why if you have a kizayis of meat which falls into a pot of milk, it is the meat that is aser, not the milk. The Savarav, is that really true? The Savarav Gedi Asar Torah V'lo Chalav, is that true? Could we even say such a thing like that? That the meat is Asar but not the milk? To which the Gemara says, V'ha Itmar. But yet we learn that what? Chatzi Zayis Basar V'chatzi Zayis Chalav. Let's listen to this interesting case. You have a half a kizayis of meat and a half a kizayis of milk. Shebashlan Ze'im Zeh, and you cook them together. You cook half a kizayis of meat and half a kizayis of milk together. We'll say, watch this case. So we'll say, you understand, this is actually very interesting. Because what am I doing over here? I have half a kizayis of meat, half a kizayis of milk. When I put them together, interestingly enough, what do I get? What do I get? I get a kizayis of basar b'chalav. So we'll say, now, is that asar basar b'chalav? Not, we're going to see. Amarav, listen to this. This is incredible, we'll say. Loka al achilaso, ve'im loka al bishulo. So listen to this. You get malchus for eating such a mixture, but you do not get malchus for cooking such a mixture. I get malchus for eating it, I don't get malchus for cooking it. So but if you tell me that you only get malchus for the meat in a milk and meat mixture, but not for chalav, then achila amailoke chatzi shirhu. Then I will say, why would I get malchus for consumption? Because after all, again, what am I consuming? Only what? Only a half a kizayis of meat. Ella li'olam kasavarav chalav nami aser. Rather, I will say, you have to say that you're right. Rav holds, I will say, in a basar b'chalav mixture, Rav holds that the chalav is also aser. V'hachav mayaskinon. So what's the case here? Kigon shenafal l'soch yora rosachas. Wow. I will say, here we come to a fascinating case. In our situation, I will say over here, of the kizayis of meat falling into a pot of milk, what is occurring? The pot is boiling. Now, I will say, in general, in one of the general halachos, when it comes to absorptions, we hold mivla balat, mivla bala, miflat lo palat. I will say, when something is put into a boiling pot, I will say the assumption is absorption occurs, but expulsion of flavor does not. It's just part of the halachic mechanics of cooking. When something is boiling, so items have the ability to absorb, but they do not have the ability to exude or to expel. Therefore, I will say that's why the Gemara says over here, when you drop this piece of meat into a pot, this kizayis of meat into a pot of milk, we're talking about a yoro sachas, the milk is boiling, therefore the meat absorbs from the milk, but because there's a boiling process, the meat does not expel flavor into the milk. That's why the milk will be mutter, but ultimately, again, the meat will be aser, but the milk will be mutter. Kinaya chadar palit. Okay, that's nice, but at some point in time, the pot of milk is going to stop boiling, and at that point in time, the meat should expel its flavor into the milk, to which the Gemara says, Kishakidem v'silkon. It's a very specific case. What's a specific case? Where you took out the meat before the pot stopped boiling. So we'll say, in this very, very, very specific case, what's happening over here? I dropped a piece of meat into a boiling pot of milk. So we'll say, what's the halacha? The halacha is, the meat will be aser. Why? Because it absorbs from the meat. The milk will be mutter. Why? Because since it's boiling, the meat doesn't have the ability to expel its flavor into the milk. And that only works if what? If I take the piece of meat out of the milk before the milk stopped boiling. Good, that's the case. Gufa. But now the Gemara goes back to the interesting bombshell case that you just dropped before. Chatzi zayis basar v'chatzi zayis chalav shebishlan zeh. We'll say, what about the case of the half a kizayis of meat and the half a kizayis of milk that you cooked together? So remember again, we'll say, what did we say about that case? Amarav loke al achilasa ve'ino loke al bishulo. So Rav said you get malchus for consumption, you don't get malchus for bishul. Right, so we'll say if I eat it, I get malchus, but I don't get malchus ultimately again for cooking it. So I don't understand. Manavshach, imitztarfin abishol nami lilki, ilomitztarfin achila nami lo lilki. So one says, I don't understand. If you tell me that a half a kizayis of milk and a half a kizayis of meat are mitztarif combined, then I will say, what's the halacha? Then I should be chayiv for bishol the same way that I'm chayiv for achila. And if a half a kizayis of milk and a half a kizayis of meat are not mitztarif, do not combine, then what? Then the same way that I'm not chayiv for bishul, I also should not be chayiv for what? For achila, for consumption. In other words, I will say, in general, again, we assume that liability for basar b'chalav is the same for bishul as it is for achila. So if a half a kizayis of milk and meat combine to make me chayiv on bishul, they're going to make me chayiv ultimately again on if they're going to make me chayiv for bishul, they're going to make me chayiv for achila, they're going to make me chayiv for bishul. And conversely is the same as well. If they're going to make me chayiv ultimately again for achila, make me chayiv for bishul as well. To which the Gemara says, Li'olam lo mitztarfi. In reality, ultimately again, a half a kizayis of basar and a half a kizayis of chalav, Rabbi say, do not go ahead and combine. Rashi says, it's almost right across in Rashi, Li'olam lo mitztarfi, la'asos iser, ela imkin hayabo b'tchila kishir. So I'll say, in reality, in order to create basar b'chalav, right, you really need a kizayis of basar and a kizayis of chalav. That's really what you need. There has to be a tseruf. To which the Gemara says, Li'olam lo mitztarfi. In reality, half a kizayis of basar, half a kizayis of chalav do not combine. So we'll say, what's the case over here? So if they don't combine, so now I understand ultimately why I'm not chayiv for bishul. But why would I be chayiv then for achila? Ubeba miyore gedola. We'll say, the case over here is where I have basar and chalav that were cooked independently, right? I have a pot of basar b'chalav, right? Pot A is basar b'chalav, pot B is basar b'chalav, right? 2 pots of basar b'chalav. And I will say, what am I doing over here? I'm taking a half a kizayis of chalav from pot A and a half a kizayis of chalav from pot B, and I'm eating them together. And I will say, both of those half kizayisim were already what? Were already bona fide basar b'chalav on their own. I'm now taking a half a kizayis from each of those pots and I'm eating it together. So I'll say, now I understand what's the halacha. Ultimately, again, that's why I will be chayiv for achila, right? Because I'm eating a kizayis of basar b'chalav. But what the Gemara is teaching me is that if I were to cook a half a kizayis of basar with a half a kizayis of chalav, I would not be chayiv for that. V'levi amar af lo ke'al bishulo. Levi would say, you even get malchus ultimately again for bishul in such a situation. V'ching tani Levi b'masnisin, and so too Levi says in the Mishnah, kishem shelo ke'al achilasan kach lo ke'al bishulo. The same way you get malchus ultimately for consumption, you get malchus ultimately again for bishul. Ube'eze bishul amru, and I will say, what type of bishul would you get malchus for? The bishul shachirim ochlin oso machmas bishulo. And I will say, you get malchus ultimately again for the type of case where someone else would eat it as a result of the bishul. Shabbos say is another way of saying this. Actually, Shabbos say there are actually 2 interesting halachas that are coming out over here. Number one, Shabbos say that first of all, for basar b'chalav, in order to be chai for basar b'chalav, you have to take a kizayis of basar and a kizayis of chalav. That's number one. And the case where the Brisa said that if you eat a half a kizayis of basar, half a kizayis of chalav, you're going to be chayiv. Shabbos say that's where the basar is coming from a mixture of basar b'chalav, and the chalav is coming from a kizayis of basar b'chalav. But ultimately, and therefore you eat a half a kizayis of both. Of course, they're mitzarif because they're already each a half a kizayis of already established basar b'chalav. But if you were to take a half a kizayis of basar and a half a kizayis of chalav and cook them together, that would not be the prohibition of basar b'chalav. You need a kizayis of each. That's number one. Number two, Rabbi say, what type of bishul are you chayiv for? Only the type of bishul where someone else would ultimately go ahead and eat of this bishul. Which I will say means it has to be cooked to the point. It's actually interesting. If you only cook basar b'chalav a little bit, but it's not really in an edible state, and you eat it, you're not chayiv for that. You have to cook it to the point that others would go ahead and eat from this dish. The efshel sochto atzmo tonight. So we'll say now we're going back to efshel sochto. So we'll say remember again. In the case of efshel sochto, we'll say, so what does that mean? The piece of meat absorbs ultimately the milk, and now again the shaila is if you recook it, and therefore we assume that through recooking the absorptions come out. So can you go ahead and render the piece of meat once again kosher, or do we say no? Once it absorbs, it becomes asur forever. It becomes asur forever, and even if you manage to extract the absorptions, the piece of meat still remains an avela. The efshel sochto asmo tanahi. And it says the Gemara, this whole discussion of efshel sochto is in and of itself a machlokes tanaim. This sanya because we learned in a Raisa. Tipas chalav shenafla ala chaticha. If a drop of milk falls on a piece of meat, kevan shenas natam bechaticha. Once the drop of milk gives tam, gives flavor to the chaticha, gives flavor to the piece of meat, hachaticha atzma naasis nevela. The chaticha itself becomes an nevela. So the entire identity of the piece of meat changes from a piece of meat to like a chaticha of basar b'chalav, right? It's a chaticha of the, like we call it nevela. V'oseres kala chatichos kulon mipnei shehin mina div Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi say, in turn, if this is a pot of a mixture of pieces of meat, because now it becomes a mixture of min b'mino, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the entire mixture becomes asra als min b'mino. The Chachamim say, at shetitin tam birotav ubekifa ubechatichos. And I will say, ultimately, again, the Chachamim say that it's only asr when? It's only asr, the drop of milk is only asr if there's enough not only to give flavor in the piece of meat, but to give flavor ultimately, again, in everything inside of the pot. So I will say, so this is the fundamental machlokes. The Amar Rebbe says, Divra Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's words would seem to be clear when? Bishalo nir, bishalo kisa. If you did not stir the pot, or cover the pot. So if you didn't stir the pot or if you didn't cover the pot, then what, Rabbi say? We measure the impact of the drop on the piece of meat, ultimately, again, vis-a-vis the actual piece of meat itself and not regarding anything else. The divrei chachamim and the words of the chachamim ultimately when? Bishanir vikisa. Ultimately, again, when you covered the pot or when you stirred the pot. So both say, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is as follows. It's actually quite interesting. So here's what we have. A drop of milk falls on a piece of meat. So ultimately we have Rabbi Huda saying that what? That halacha lamaisa chaticha atzma nases nevela, the entire piece of meat itself becomes a prohibited item, and therefore goes ahead and answers all of the other chatichos. But I will say, most importantly, what Rabbi Huda is saying is that when that drop of meat falls on the when that drop of milk falls on the piece of meat, we only measure the impact of that drop of milk vis-a-vis the piece of meat, not regarding anything else. However, again, the Chachamim say that we go ahead and we measure the impact of the milk on the entire pot. Right? We look at shishim corresponding to the entire pot. To which the Gemara is now suggesting maybe they're not really arguing. Rather, instead, maybe halacha l'maisa, what we do over here is there are different cases. Maybe case one is where the pot's not being stirred. If the pot's not being stirred, then what? Then we measure the impact of the drop of the milk only corresponding to what? The piece of meat that it fell on. But if the pot is being stirred, then what? Then halacha l'maisa, we measure the impact of the drop of the milk vis-a-vis the pot in its entirety. So maybe they're not really arguing in halacha, but rather arguing in mitzias. When you don't stir, all you could do is measure the drop of milk vis-a-vis the piece of meat that fell on. When you stir the pot, you could go ahead and measure the impact of the drop of milk vis-a-vis the pot in its entirety. So we'll stop here for today. We'll resume this machlokes Emir Hashem tomorrow. I'll share with you a short idea from the parsha. So we have the great schos this week to begin Chumash Vayikra, and in Chumash Vayikra, so we begin to get very much into the halachos concerning karbanos. And the Torah begins by giving us kind of like general concepts by karbanos. Before the Torah launches into specific karbanos, like it does by karban nedava, so the Torah says as follows. Daber al b'nei Yisrael, we actually quoted this pasuk last night by the Rabbi Nachman Shir as well. Daber al b'nei Yisrael va'amarta aleim. Speak to the Jewish people, and you'll say unto them, Adam ki yakerev mikem karban la'Hashem. So if a person amongst you goes ahead and brings a karban la'Hashem, mina behema, mina bakar, mina tzon takriva is karban chem. So ultimately, again, mina behema from animals, from bakar, from tzon, from cattle, from sheep, shall you go ahead and offer up your karban. Fine, straightforward pasuk, I will say. So there's an incredible insight by the Tiferes Shlomo of Radomsk, where he says from this pasuk, we always speak about this, which is when the Torah goes into such incredible detail regarding sacrificial law, obviously there's a deeper embedded message. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that there would be now at least 2,000 years that we are without the Beis HaMikdash, without karbanos. And even before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, there were other times where there was not organized sacrificial service. So I'll say, so you have to ask yourself, why spend so much time regarding halachos that seem to be not pertinent right now? And of course the simple answer is, because even if they appear to be impractical or unobservable right now, there's a deeper embedded message for us to discover. So says the Tiferes Shlomo something absolutely beautiful. He says, what's the lesson we learn from karbanos? See, the way the Rebbe understands it over here is deep inside of these psukim is an incredible message for our own growth. So what can we learn ultimately from karbanos? Listen to the words of the Tiferes Shlomo. Umma'im behema pshuta. When it comes to a simple animal, Kevan sh'adam yisrael koreh aleh b'ma'amar piv karban. Here's something amazing. You take a sheep, and suddenly what happens? You take that sheep and you say, that sheep is a karban. I will say something amazing happens. What occurs? Harayu miskadeshes b'kedusha el yona. Suddenly again, that animal is vested with the most incredible kedusha. Umazin as dama lifnai v'lifnim. And when that animal is slaughtered, you go ahead and you take its blood and you sprinkle it again in the innermost sanctum of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I will say, what did I do? I simply went ahead and I said, Kaddish. I simply said, Karban. I simply said a word, this animal is Kaddish, and suddenly again I will say, what was a simple, mundane, unholy animal suddenly becomes vested with the most incredible level of Kedusha. Says Rebbe something amazing. Kol shekain imhu kori alatzmo. I will say, if this works for an animal, can you imagine what we could do for ourselves? When a person says about himself, Harini mekabel alai lihios kodesh laHashem, Mehayom v'hala. When a person says, I hereby take upon myself to be Kodesh Lashem, to be sanctified for God from this day forward, Masha haya haya, what was, the past is the past. Mikan va'elech hareini kadosh Lashem. From this point forward, I choose to make myself Kodesh Lashem. From this point forward, I choose to make myself sanctified to God. Shebevadai, shora alav kiddusha ilah. Certainly, Rabbi say, if it works for an animal, it works for me. If for an animal I could say Kodesh Lashem, and suddenly again it stops being an animal and starts becoming a sacrifice to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is vested, we've learned, invested with incredible sanctity, then imagine what could happen if I say about myself, Harini mekabel alai liyos Kodesh Lashem me'ayom v'hala. Today, I accept upon myself to be Kodesh Lashem. What was, the past is the past. From this point forward, I hereby take upon myself to be Kodesh Lashem. Imagine what that can do for us. Says Rebbe, this is the meaning in the pasuk. Adam kiyakriv mikem karban laHashem. If we want to make of ourselves a karban laHashem, what does it mean to make of yourself a karban laHashem? The will say karban is from lashon of karov. I want to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll say, that's my goal. Kirvas Elokim, I want to come close. But yet we all struggle. How do I come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Says the Tiferet Shlomo, says the Rebbe of Radomsk, the pasuk itself tells us, Adam kiyakriv mikem karban laHashem. If you want to come karov, how do you do it? It's very simple. Mina behema. Just look at the process for animals and just mimic that same exact process for yourself. Mina behema takrivu es karbanchem. What works for the animal will work for me as well. And I think the Rebbe is teaching us two incredible lessons. Two incredible lessons. Number one, if again an animal is able to become kadosh simply by a declaration of kedusha, a person could become kadosh by making a declaration that from here on, I am kadosh laHashem. Yesterday was yesterday, last year was last year, the last 30 years, the last 30 years. Today I'm someone new. But I will say, I think it's something deeper. I think that Rebbe is teaching us that sometimes the pathway to kedusha begins with the articulation of intent and the articulation of a plan. I will say, what is our plan for ourselves? You see, sometimes we go through life and we get so caught up, we speak about this a lot, just like in the day-to-day stuff, that we don't really think about what we want to be when we grow up. I don't really think about, what are my spiritual goals and aspirations? Who do I want to be? Because I'll tell you something amazing. Life goes by very quickly, and one day you wake up and you did a lot of good things in your life, and you accomplished a lot of wonderful things, but you haven't scratched the surface of your potential. Why? Because I never really took the time to think about it. I never really actually took the time to articulate a spiritual master life plan for myself. What do I want to be? Who do I want to be? We sometimes put a focus on dynamic activity, which is so incredible and so great, and that's wonderful, and we should keep doing that. But sometimes I also have to ask myself, right? Harini karban, harini mekabel alai liyos kodesh laHashem. We'll say the same way that if you go ahead and you say to the animal, you're a karban. We'll say, is that effective? Is that effective? It's partially effective. But what are you missing? What are you missing from that declaration? What kind of karban? What kind of karban? See, I will say, everything is in the definition. Everything is in the articulation, ultimately, again, of the plan. So when you say harini karban, that's a wonderful first step. But ultimately, again, what kind of karban? So says the Tiferet Shlomo, Adam kiyakriv miken karban laHashem. It's amazing. The step to closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't necessarily begin with dynamic activity. It begins with the articulation of our intent, the articulation of a plan. I want to be Kodesh, but how does that Kedusha manifest itself? How am I going to get there? What am I going to do in my day-to-day life? And what are my more global dreams and aspirations? I want to be Kodesh laHashem, but I have to take the time to try to figure out how. We often live in such a manic, frenetic pace that we focus a lot on, I got to do this, got to do this, got to do this, which is incredible. But I also have to take the time to articulate the life plan for myself. Who do I want to be? What do I want to be? Adam kiyakriv miken karban laHashem. If you want to go ahead and become karov to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's very simple. Mina behema. Just take your cue from the behema. An ordinary behema could become a karban just in one simple articulation. You're a karban. so too, Rabbi say, I could turn my life around with one simple articulation. It's an expression of intent. Number one, I want to be kadosh. I want to be holy. Rabbi say the words. Not now. Rabbi say the words. Right? I want to be holy. And when you articulate that intent, Rabbi say that is the beginning of the journey. Expression of intent that I want to be heilig. Expression of intent that I want to be holy. Expression of intent that I want to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the beginning of the journey. But I would add on to the Rebbe, that's part one. Part two is, and how do I get there? And how do I get there? What does it look like to be holy? What does it mean to be holy? And ultimately, again, how do I get to that finish line? How do I actualize that goal, that dream, that aspiration? Adam kiyakir mikem. There's a lot we can learn from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a lot we can learn from each other, and apparently there's a lot that we can learn from the animals as well. We should be Zachar Rabosai to number one, articulate the intent. I want to be Kaddish. But then Amirat Hashem find the strength to be able to create for ourselves that beautiful life plan as well.